The stale scent of coffee and yesterday's regrets hung in the air of my home office. It was a Tuesday, which meant I was battling a spreadsheet that seemed actively hostile to logic, and the gray Seattle afternoon outside my window did nothing to lift my spirits. My name is Mark, and at 38, I'd carved out a life of quiet, predictable order. That order was about to be thoroughly upended. My sister, Brenda, had called me 3 days prior. Her voice tight with that specific blend of exhaustion and desperation known only to parents of teenagers. Mark, it's Jason. He's just so angry all the time. We had another blow up, this one worse than the others. He won't talk to me, he's slamming doors. I need a favor, a big one. Jason, my 17-year-old nephew, was a good kid at his core, but the recent years had sanded down his edges into something sharp and defensive. His father, my brother-in-law, had left the picture years ago, and the absence had festered. Brenda, a nurse working double shifts, was at her wit's end. "Can he stay with you for a little while?" She'd pleaded. "Just a week or two. Maybe a change of scenery, some male influence." "I don't know, Mark. I'm out of ideas." So Jason arrived, a storm cloud in a hoodie, his duffel bag thrown over his shoulder like a declaration of war. For 2 days, our interactions were a series of polite, stilted exchanges. He'd grunt in morning, I'd ask about his online schoolwork. He'd mumble a non-committal answer, and then retreat into the guest room, the door clicking shut with a note of finality. I gave him space, remembering my own turbulent teenage years and how suffocating adult concern could feel. That Tuesday, deep in my spreadsheet battle, I realized I hadn't heard a peep from him in hours. No video game sounds, no muffled music. A sliver of concern, sharp and pointed, pierced my concentration. What if he'd just taken off? What if he was in some kind of trouble? I pushed back from my desk, the chair groaning in protest. The house was preternaturally quiet. I walked down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my weight, their sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, the internal debate between respecting privacy and ensuring safety raging briefly before the latter won out. I pushed the door open slowly. The scene inside freezing me in the doorway. Jason was sprawled on his stomach across the bed, fully clothed, lost in the deep, untroubled sleep of the young. One arm was tucked under his pillow, the other hanging off the side of the bed. And there, on the floor beside his dangling hand, was his tool. It wasn't a wrench or a screwdriver. It was a vintage, well-loved snap-on ratchet, its chrome finish worn in places from use. Lying next to it was the engine block of a 1969 Mustang, a beautiful, complex, and utterly disassembled piece of machinery that was his ongoing project. He'd been working on it in my garage, the one place he seemed to find any peace. The sight was so profoundly disarming. The angry, guarded teenager was gone, replaced by a sleeping boy, vulnerable and exhausted. His face, usually a mask of sullen indifference, was smooth and young. And there was the tool, right there, having clearly slipped from his grasp as sleep overtook him. The metaphor was almost too heavy-handed. His passion, his focus, his one point of control lying helpless on the floor, and I couldn't resist. A mischievous, almost paternal idea bloomed in my mind. It was stupid, probably, and could backfire spectacularly. But the urge to bridge the chasm between us with something other than a lecture or an awkward question was too strong. I crept into the room, moving with the exaggerated care of a cartoon burglar. I held my breath, half expecting him to wake up and shoot me a look of pure, unadulterated teen fury. But he didn't stir. His breathing remained deep and even. I bent down, the knees of my jeans pressing into the coarse fibers of the carpet. The cool, solid weight of the ratchet felt significant in my palm. I stood up, looking from the tool in my hand to the sea of engine parts laid out on a tarp in the corner of the room. The plan solidified. I retreated from the room as silently as I'd entered, closing the door with a soft click. I didn't go back to my office. I went straight to the garage. The garage was Jason's sanctuary, and now it smelled of him, a mix of gasoline, clean metal, and the deodorant he used. The Mustang's engine block sat on a sturdy workbench, a complex jigsaw puzzle of pistons, valves, and gears. I knew my way around a toolbox well enough for basic home repairs, but this was a different league. This was this art. My idea was simple. I would hide the ratchet, but not just anywhere. I would make it a game, a puzzle, a peace offering disguised as a prank. I found a small, clear plastic parts bag, the kind with a Ziploc top. I placed the ratchet inside. Then I looked around. My eyes fell on an old red metal fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was vintage, more for show than function. I unscrewed the top. Perfect. I dropped the bagged ratchet inside, the chrome glinting in the dim garage light before it settled at the bottom. I screwed the cap back on, but that was too easy. He'd never look there. I needed a trail. A clue. I found a pad of sticky notes and a Sharpie in a drawer. I wrote in block letters. Sometimes the key is knowing when to stop. Check the emergency. Brake. I stuck the note right in the center of his workbench, on top of a clean shop rag. The emergency. Brake in my car, an old Jeep, was notoriously sticky. He had helped me with it once. The next part required a small betrayal. I went back inside and, with trembling hands, took the spare key to my Jeep from the hook by the door. Back in the garage, I opened the driver's side door. The interior smelled of old leather and pine air freshener. I pulled the emergency brake, hearing the familiar click. I tucked the next clue, another sticky note, right under the lever. It read, "Not all leaks are bad. Check the drip pan dot under the Jeep." I kept a flat black drip pan to catch the occasional spot of oil. It was currently dry. I placed the next note in the center of the pan, weighing it down with a single clean washer. This note said, "To put out a fire, you sometimes need to look in the last place you'd expect." I was back at the fire extinguisher. The final clue. The wait was agonizing. I busied myself making dinner, the act of chopping vegetables a flurry of nervous energy. What if he was just mad? What if he saw this as a violation, an adult messing with his things? I was risking the fragile truce we had. An hour later, I heard his door open and his footsteps pad down the hall to the bathroom. The shower ran. Eventually he emerged, his hair damp, his hoodie back on. He wandered into the kitchen, his eyes still puffy with sleep. "Hey," he grunted, slouching into a chair at the kitchen table. "Hey yourself, spaghetti okay?" "Yeah, sure." We ate in near silence for a few minutes, the only sound the clinking of forks on plates. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was mentally back in the garage with his project. "I'm gonna go work on the Mustang," he said finally, standing up and taking his plate to the sink. "Knock yourself out," I said, trying to sound casual. He disappeared into the garage, and I immediately started cleaning the already clean kitchen, my ears straining for any sound. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard it. A soft rustle. A pause. Then the distinct sound of the Jeep door opening. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crept to the door that connected the kitchen to the garage and peered through the small window. Jason was standing by the workbench, the first sticky note in his hand. He wasn't scowling. He looked puzzled. He turned and looked out the garage window as if expecting to see someone. Then he walked over to the Jeep and disappeared inside. A moment later, he emerged, holding the second note. He got down on his knees, looked under the Jeep, and retrieved the note from the drip pan. He stood up, reading the third clue. He looked around the garage, his gaze sweeping over the tool chests, the shelves of oil cans, the old tires. His eyes landed on the fire extinguisher. He stared at it for a long, long time. A slow, incredulous smile began to spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since he'd arrived. He walked over to the extinguisher, unscrewed the top, and reached inside. His hand emerged holding the plastic bag. He looked at the ratchet, then back towards the house, directly at the window where I was standing. I ducked back, my face flushing. A minute later, the garage door opened and he walked in. He held up the bagged ratchet. "Did you do this?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was laced with something I couldn't quite place: amusement, maybe even a flicker of respect. "I might have," I admitted, leaning against the counter. I saw you were sleeping pretty hard earlier. Didn't want your good tool to get stepped on." He looked at the ratchet, then back at me. "The fire extinguisher? Seriously? You figured it out, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. That was actually kind of cool. That single sentence, "actually kind of cool," felt like winning the lottery. He didn't retreat back to his room. He stayed in the kitchen, the bagged ratchet still in his hand. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "my dad. He was going to help me rebuild an engine." Before he left, he promised. The air went out of the room. This was the first time he'd ever mentioned his father to me voluntarily. "I'm sorry, Jason," I said, and I meant it. "That really sucks." He just shrugged, but the defensive wall wasn't fully up. The prank, the puzzle, had created a tiny crack in his armor, and a sliver of truth had slipped out. "You know," I said, gesturing to the ratchet, "if you ever want a hand."